Most language learners recognize this moment. At first, everything moves forward. You study consistently, your vocabulary grows, your confidence increases, and then something strange happens. Progress slows down. You read more, you listen more, you review grammar again and again. Yet the fluency you expected begins to feel like the moon seen from Earth, visible, luminous, but still distant. This experience has a name, and linguists call it the language plateau. Teachers see it constantly. Learners experience it across the world. Even with consistent effort, there are periods where visible progress becomes very slow. Sometimes it feels as if learning has stopped entirely. One concept helps explain this pattern. In 1972, linguist Larry Selinka introduced the idea of interlanguage fossilization. He observed that adult learners sometimes develop stable forms of language that resist further change. These forms become comfortable, they work well enough for communication, and over time they stop evolving. Even when learners continue studying and using the language, certain patterns remain frozen. This is one reason many adult learners study a language for years, sometimes decades, yet never fully reach near native fluency. Another perspective comes from Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis. Krashen argued that language develops when learners receive input that is slightly beyond their current level. He called this level I plus 1. The idea is simple. If the language you hear is just a little more complex than what you already know, your brain gradually adapts and expands its system. But input alone does not solve everything. Linguist Meryl Swain proposed another idea called the output hypothesis. She argued that producing language plays a different role in learning. When we try to speak or write, we suddenly discover gaps in our knowledge. We realize what we cannot yet express. This pressure forces the brain to reorganize what it knows. In other words, output exposes the limits of our competence. Another key idea comes from Richard Schmidt. Schmidt proposed the noticing hypothesis. According to this view, learners must consciously notice features of the language before they can fully acquire them. Simply hearing English is not always enough. Attention matters. The brain must register the pattern. Only then can it gradually integrate it into the internal language system. Taken together, these theories point toward the same conclusion. Language learning is not just exposure, and it is not just repetition. Real progress happens when learners engage actively with the language. Listening and reading increase familiarity, but fluency often requires output, noticing, and interaction. A practical example makes this clearer. Many adult learners can understand podcasts, articles, or meetings quite well, but when they try to speak, something changes. They hesitate, they repeat the same safe sentence structures, they avoid unfamiliar forms. The knowledge exists, but access to that knowledge remains unstable. The opposite situation can happen as well. Another learner memorizes grammar rules and completes exercises perfectly. Yet spontaneous conversation still feels difficult. Both cases reveal the same underlying issue. Parts of the internal language system remain inactive. Psychology also plays a role. Krashen proposed another idea known as the affective filter hypothesis. According to this model, emotional factors influence how well we acquire language. Anxiety, fear of mistakes, and self-consciousness can raise a mental barrier. When this barrier is high, language input becomes less effective. Adults often experience this more strongly than children. Children experiment freely. Adults analyze, hesitate, and protect themselves from error. Another influential framework is Michael Long's interaction hypothesis. This theory emphasizes the importance of real communication. When learners interact with others, they negotiate meaning. They adjust their speech. They respond to feedback. These processes encourage deeper cognitive processing and stronger language development. When we place all these ideas together, the plateau becomes easier to understand. Adult learners often accumulate large amounts of knowledge. Vocabulary grows, grammar explanations make sense, listening comprehension improves. Yet something still feels incomplete. The knowledge exists, but it does not always activate automatically. The learner becomes like a closed bookshelf. There is a rich archive of information inside, but access to that archive is not always immediate. Progress may still be happening internally, even when visible performance seems unchanged. This brings us to an important conclusion. Language plateaus do not indicate laziness, and they do not indicate lack of talent. They reveal the difference between studying a language and acquiring a language as a living system. Adults often approach English analytically, through textbooks, through rules, through translation. Yet fluency rarely lives inside isolated grammar rules. It develops through repeated patterns of use, through interaction, through noticing how language behaves in real contexts. Plateaus are frustrating, but they are not walls, they are thresholds. They signal that the learner may need deeper engagement, more communication, more production, more attention to patterns that appear in real language. The plateau is not the end of progress. It is often the moment when learning must change direction.